Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first panel of the day. Are you guys having a good time? Wonderful. Awesome. This hotel is huge. I got lost like 3 times just trying to find my bed in the room. And it's like, welcome to the How Sweet It Is panel featuring the legendary Roger Sweet. First time here at PowerCon, and we are certainly honored to have him here. Roger, welcome. Thank you for being here with us today.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all the fans for coming.
How have you been finding your experience thus far here at PowerCon?
Incredibly wonderful. I cannot believe how wonderful the fans have been to me. Just sensational. Cannot thank you enough. And let me say one other thing. A lot of guys have come up from Mexico, and it's so neat that they're showing here too.
Yeah, we have a lot of.
Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, good.
We have a lot of international fans here from all over the world.
Yeah.
Germany,
I
Spain.
just met a guy from Argentina. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Roger, let's get the ball rolling here and talk a little bit. But before we do that, I just want to remind everybody that you can take photographs, that's fine, but there is no filming allowed because we are filming all of the panels here at PowerCon, and you'll be able to see them on YouTube. So we have Danielle Benedict, who's our videographer, and he'll be filming all the panels, but you are allowed to take photographs. And at the end of the panel, we'll have a Q&A where you can ask Roger some questions as well. But I have a few questions here myself. Roger, could you talk to us a little bit about your background in design? You've designed many characters, but it wasn't only at Mattel. You worked on many different projects over the years. Could you talk a little bit about your background as a designer?
Okay, would you first of all like to get into the He-Man Masters stuff and then talk about my other background after that?
Absolutely, however you want to do it.
The reason I say that is I have 15 years of product design before I got into the toy business.
All right, let's start with He-Man then.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, so talk to us about He-Man. Now, of course, we know that you created these 3 prototypes of the Barbarian, the Spaceman, and the tank top, the military character with the tank head. Talk to us a little bit about the origins of He-Man and how you came up with the name He-Man.
Okay, well, in 1980, Big Jim was hardly selling at all for Mattel. And Ray Wagner, the president of the company in 1976, had passed on Star Wars, and it became a huge hit. So Wagner badly wanted a new male action line for Mattel, but he wanted it to be created inside Mattel so that he wouldn't have to pay royalties to an outside company or inventor. So there were 3 product conferences in 1980, and the first one was in January of 1980, and I showed one concept called Mini World, which consisted of a whole play set that had 2¼ inch figures, but you could sell a whole play set at a very reasonable price, except Wagner looked at it, he says the figures are too small to be seen real clearly. And so he passed on that. And then in March, a second male action concept was shown called Giants. And that concept was created by Diana Troop in my preliminary design group, but Mark Taylor did all the illustrations for it. But these were 16-inch tall figures. They were very ugly looking. They were fairly muscular, but they were very ugly looking, and they were hunched over, and they had decaying teeth showing. And so they looked like ugly looking bad guys, And so Ray Wagner passed on that concept because the figures were too large to sell at a reasonable price and they were ugly. Now, if Taylor would have done a really great looking giant, then maybe he could have sold that concept, you know what I'm saying? If it were reduced, but he didn't. So anyhow, then in mid-1980, about May, marketing wanted to do a male action figure theme research study with children and moms to find out what themes were most popular. And so Paul Cleveland, who was a new manager in Mattel marketing, came to me. He bypassed my boss, Derek Gable, came to me to get a list of themes. And I gave him a list of 10 themes. So then they market tested those themes and they found out that the 3 most popular ones were the Barbarian theme a la Frank Frazetta and the current military theme a la G.I. Joe and the space military theme a la Star Wars. And so there was a third product conference in December 18th, 1980 coming up, and everybody in Derek Gable's preliminary design group was trying to come up with a concept. And so the concept I originally created was He-Man, but 3 other concepts were shown. One was called Kid Gallant. This concept was originated by Diana Troop, but it was totally developed in 19-inch by 24-inch beautiful illustrations, line illustrations by Mark Taylor. There was a third concept shown called Robin and the Space Hoods, with the Robin Hood taken into space. And this project, this concept was originated by Pete White and Derek Gable's preliminary design group, but all of the drawings were done by Mark Taylor in beautiful 19-inch by 24-inch line drawings. So those 2 concepts, there was one other concept. Derek Gable and the group came up with a concept about a guy by the name of Kenny Do It. In other words, can he do it? about a stunt car, race car driver that gets into all kinds of scrapes, but seems to come out unscathed. So Gable presented his concept with drawings done by him, but Troop and White showed concepts that were totally developed by Mark Taylor. So Mark Taylor spent a huge amount of time developing the Kid Gallant and the Robin and the Space Hood concept while I was originating and developing the He-Man concept. So the concepts were shown in the December 18th, 1980 product conference, and Ray Wagner looked over all the concepts. He was the guy that selected all the toys for the line for Mattel. And he looked over all 4 of the concepts and he said, let's market test all of them. And then right at the end of the product conference, he very quietly pointed to my concepts and he said, those have the power, just like that. So after this was December 18th, a week before Christmas. So nothing happened in relation to male action until the beginning of the new year. So then Derek Gable and I went to the marketing guys, Mark Ellis and Paul Cleveland, and we said, do you want to do market research and chance the He-Man concept coming out not first? And they said no. So they quietly killed the market research on the rest of the line and decided to go with He-Man. So anyhow, the He-Man concept, I took a big Jim figure that was 9.5 inches tall. First of all, I looked over a bunch of male action figures, particularly the 3 3/4 inch ones. They were scrawny little guys, and they were very fragile and would break very easily. In fact, I have one right now that has the arm torn off it. So, and they often were found in mangled poses, you know, like with the back going forward and that sort of thing. And so I decided on this new line of figures that I would do, I hadn't named them yet, that I would make a figure that was standing in a battle action pose so that no matter how you looked at him, he'd look good, pretty good. And so I took a big Jim figure, I widened his chest, 5/8 of an inch was a lot for a big Jim figure, and I added a huge amount of clay to him. I spent 2 days making this clay model over Big Jim. I still didn't have a name for this guy. And so I took this clay model to the Mattel mold shop, and I gave it to the mold shop and said I need 5 plaster casts of this. So then I went back and I brainstormed a 2-page list of names. Great man, tough guy, terrific guy. You know, all kinds of different names. But the instant I got that He-Man name, bong, a giant bell went off in my head. So that was the name I used for this Mattel lead heroic male action figure. However, the He-Man name, when I was growing up, in Akron, Ohio, which was a pretty tough town. It was the rubber capital of the world. There were a lot of tough guys there. But every once in a while, when I was a kid, I would hear some really strong guy called He-Man. So I checked the history of the name He-Man, and I found out that He-Man, from one source, that He-Man name is an Americanism dating back to 1925. But then, recently, I checked the Merriam-Webster dictionary on the internet, and it claims that the He-Man name was first used in 1758. Incredible. So this name quietly has a long history and to it. So then, anyhow, I took 3 of these 5 plaster casts and made them in the 3 themes that had tested most strongly. The Barbarian, the futuristic space military a la Star Wars, and the G.I. Joe, but I enhanced them. In the 3 weeks leading up to the product conference, I spent 60 hours of overtime, 180 hours working on those 3 figures. I took these figures on the G.I. Joe takeoff. I went across the street from Mattel, and there was a model shop there, and I bought a German Panzer tank. And I took the turret from that and put it on the helmet, put it on the head for the military figure. And then I took a Boba Fett figure from Star Wars, and I took the helmet off that and put it on the futuristic space military guy. And the other helmet I formed on the lathe and et cetera. The material that I used for these 3 figures was 32nd inch sheet wax. I took 2 sheets of this 32nd inch sheet wax, which had an adhesive backing on it, and stuck them together. And this made parts that were about the same thickness as an injection molded part. And then I formed all of those parts by hand and put them on the 3 figures after I painted the figures. The G.I. Joe takeoff figure and the Star Wars takeoff figures on the head had no detailing. They were just painted because their helmets covered their head. But on the Barbarian guy, I took the guy and he had a facial grimace like this and with his teeth showing. Before that, all male action figures were like this. and most of them just stood at ease. And so to take this guy and put a grimace on his face and put him in a battle action pose, it worked. So then for the Barbarian theme, I had been told by Derek Gable that Mark Taylor should just be working with Diana Troop and Pete White on their 2 concepts. But I went to Mark and I asked him if he would do an illustration of a Barbarian theme. And so in a couple days, Mark gave me a line drawing. It was roughly done. It was just a line, no color. It had a guy standing, very average physique, standing in a non-action pose, and no expression on his face, but he had a chest halter on him. So I took that chest halter and the fur pants and the fur cape, and that was all I used of Taylor's drawing. And so I took those and used them on the Barbarian theme, He-Man. So we showed that the He-Man trio at the product conference, and they went with it from there. So that's about it for now. What do you think?
Sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me say this. That Barbarian theme and all 3 of the He-Man's physiques at 9.5 inches were directly proportioned down to the 1982 original series male figures. And so Mark Taylor had the job of, first of all, I came up with the key seed ideas for 6 out of 8 of the first year figures. Mark Taylor originated Skeletor and Man-at-Arms, but the key seed ideas for all of the other figures I originated. What happened was Paul Cleveland had asked me for a list of themes, and some of those themes had the what was used for the first year's figures. So anyhow, what else now?
You've, in your book, Mastering the Universe, which I've read and I'm sure many people here have, you talk a lot about your interest in physical fitness in particular, and we were even talking about it on the way here to the panel.
Okay.
About working out and your idea for He-Man to be really bulky. Can you talk a little bit about your interest in physical fitness and how it played into the design of the character?
I'm a cancer survivor. Have you ever heard of Paul Allen? Paul Allen was a co-founder of Microsoft, and he was a billionaire. And Paul Allen had non-Hodgkin's large cell follicular lymphoma and died of it. I had that same form of cancer, maybe a different version, but I had that same form of cancer. I was diagnosed in 1999 and had it at the most advanced stage 4, and I had 2 years of unsuccessful chemotherapy, and my immune system went bad. I lost all my hair. So then my oncologist at the Everett Clinic sent me to the University of Washington Medical Center Hospital, and I spent 1 day short of 5 weeks there in a hospital room. And the first day I was there, they gave me 1,575 rads of radiation, which was enough to kill a person. But it was tagged to my cancer cells. And for 3 days in that room, nobody could come into it because I was radioactive. And the door to the room had a shelf on it, and they would put the food on the shelf, and I would walk over and get it. And then later on, I had all of my stem cells pumped out of me. I had all of my blood pumped out of me 3 times in 2 days, and they got 10 million stem cells from that. And then later on, they gave me the stem cells. Well, all the time that I was in the hospital, I worked out 45 minutes a day. And since then, I work out 6 days a week, an hour and a half a day. And I'm age 84, and I think it's kept me from taking a long-term dirt nap. The sweating and the heavy breathing cleans out the system. I once met a guy at Costco and dressed in a business suit, and he told me a couple things. He said, cancer hates oxygen. And he said, cancer loves sugar. Interesting.
I want to talk to you a little bit about, when we talked a lot about the sort of the origins of He-Man and the development of He-Man, but you designed many characters for the brand, and I think a lot of people might not be aware of the variety and the diversity of characters. So let's talk about some of those.
My favorite character of all time that I created never made the line. It was a character that was split down the middle vertically, and on one side he was totally bad, and on the other side he was totally good. And I called him Schizo. And so I showed this concept to marketing. They said, that's great, but how can we position him? He's got to either be all bad or all good. So they ended up making him too bad. And then there was another concept that I came up of this giant figure that was this big around, and I called him Big Mouth. He opened up and his mouth was at his waist, so his mouth opened like this. And I have illustrations of all of these guys that you can all look at if you'd like.
He'll have them at his table, and you can look at them after the panel. Yeah.
And I had a group of guys that ranged from 1 at the beginning to 6 to 10 at the end in my preliminary design group, designing Masters product. And 92.5% of the key seed ideas that went into the products in the original series of the Masters line, I originated them. So I had an incredible influence, but I had guys in my group who were incredible at taking a concept from the seed and developing it. And let me just give you an example of a key seed idea, an aquatic guy. This became Merman. A guy that flies, this became Stratos. The strongest physically built guy ever created, who would it be? He-Man. That's a key seed idea. And so I would pass these ideas on to guys in my group, and they would develop them along with my help. But once I started the germ of He-Man through the He-Man trio and the name, many other incredibly talented people developed it, including Mark Taylor and Ted Mayer and many others.
There was one, I actually was curious. There was a yellow gorilla using the Big Jim gorilla as the basis.
Yes.
And they finally did make him in 2010.
In about 1984 or 85, and I have documentation on this, I took a Big Jim gorilla, which was black, and I painted him bright yellow and with a dark green fuzz on the chest and a dark green face and white teeth and a red mouth. And I added a black outfit to him, sheet blacked again. And so I created Jigor.
So it's Jigor?
And so I showed this Jigor to Mark Ellis, and he said, "That's great." But then for some reason they didn't do it, you know? But he just thought it was incredible. And I have terrific photographs of that.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and did you see they finally did make him in 2010?
Yeah, they made him like in 2011 or something like that.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. But they didn't want to do it. For one thing, Ray Wagner had left the company, and a guy by the name of Glenn Hastings had come to the company, and I showed him this, and he says, "We can't do it. It's not the same size as the other figures."
Oh, I see. According to Mark Ellis, Mattel marketing director, and your own book as well, he said between 30 and 40% of the Masters of the Universe toy purchases were for girls. And in your book, Mastering the Universe, you corroborate that by saying 38% of purchases were for girls. And this led to the development of She-Ra and this idea of a He-Man family.
Let me say this. I created, you know something, I'm going to get this out of and read it to you.
Okay.
From the...
You guys hang tight for a second? Have a sing-along?
This is very important, so I'll just pull it out. Okay, here we go. I'm reading from a document that I wrote up, an idea disclosure called He-Man Characters and Accessories. This idea disclosure number is 10385, and I wrote this on December 30th, 1980, less than 2 weeks after I showed He-Man at the December 18th, 1980 product conference. The title of this is He-Man Characters and Accessory, and it said, He-Man can be expanded into a broad phenomena. For characters in addition to bad guys and monsters, can everybody hear me? Yes. He-Man can be part of the ultimate superfamily consisting of his mate, quote, she. The ultimate dynamite superhero, Amazon in proportions, tremendously powerful, gorgeous and sexy, with tanned skin and billowing long blonde hair, making Barbie look wimpy. So Mark Ellis, soon after I put this out, started pushing like crazy for a female action line to be developed in boys' toys marketing and design. And Mark must have seen this idea disclosure. And the fact that the disclosure name is she is just too coincidental to me, in relation to She-Ra. But in the history of female action figures, in 1937 in Britain, there was a comic book female action hero named Sheena, S-H-E-E-N-A. And then in 1942, there was an American comic female hero named Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. And so when they named She-Ra, power was a huge thing with He-Man at the time, because this line came out in, 1985?
The She-Ra line? Yes.
Yeah, so 1984 this is being developed. And so it was very obvious they couldn't use Queen, they had to use Princess, which rhymed with power, or, had the same letter. Mm-hmm. And so that's how that name came about. But that name was built from, quote, she, in my opinion. So that's a story on Sheena.
Okay.
Now, Janice Varney Hamlin had an interview with you, right?
Yes, yeah.
And she claimed that her and Kathy Larson had largely developed in marketing the She-Ra, Princess of Power line. And so nobody's ever mentioned my role in this. Mm-hmm. And so.
Because it started in boys' toys and then moved over.
You made a statement when you interviewed her that you had heard it was started in boys' toys, mm-hmm. and this is where it started.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have a good memory.
Well, I have a lot of documentation. Uh-huh. I've written a book that's this thick on He-Man Masters, and it gets into Wikipedia and all kinds of other stuff.
Are you planning to release another book?
I'd love to publish another book, but I don't have a publisher.
There any publishers out there?
Well, I've had some queries, but I haven't had a publisher. But to be fair, I haven't pushed it because I've had a lot of other stuff I've been doing.
Roger, I had a question for you here. I spoke, I'm not going to mention the name, I spoke to someone who worked on on the She-Ra brand. A while back on the She-Ra brand. It wasn't an interview, it was just a conversation.
Okay, yeah.
And I was told that...
Let me just say this. I know hardly anything about She-Ra.
Okay. This is actually relating to He-Man, actually.
Okay.
But she was also, I guess, involved with the He-Man side of things. I basically asked her why Masters of the Universe came to an end. And what I was told was that that Mattel flooded the market with Masters of the Universe in the spring after the holidays, and it was compared to shipping out massive amounts of winter coats to stores in the middle of summer. So retailers had product and couldn't handle the huge influx that glutted the market during that time. And I think it was Glenn Hastings and Tom Kalinske made that decision to send out too much product after the holidays, and that's what brought He-Man to it.
What year was that? Was 1987?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you something about the history of the growth of He-Man. When I first showed the He-Man concept in the product conference, soon after, marketing gave it a line projection of $6 million. Mm-hmm. Dennis Bosley, the vice president of preliminary design, compiled a set of statistics on the most outstanding designers in preliminary design from 1979 to 1982. And he said that I was the most productive designer in preliminary design based on three parts. First was number of concepts presented, second was number of illustrations done, and the third was number of products, the value of the products in the line. But Bosley only gave me $6 million credit for He-Man Masters. And so, and the line's done $2.1 billion and did $1.2 billion while I managed it. But the He-Man line, the Masters line, the original series, when it first came out, well, first of all, the first marketing projection for it was $6 million. Then they upped it to $12 million when it started to look promising. And then, this was before the line was on the market. Then they upped it to $19 million, wow. And everybody was incredibly nervous about it. So then the first year, the line did $38.2 million. The second year, it did $80 million. That's 1983, 1984, 111 million. 1985, 250 million. 1986, 400 million. And in 1985 and 1986, Masters knocked off Star Wars as the top-selling toy line in the world. And then in 1987, the line did 7 million. A drop from 400 million down to 7 and almost put Mattel out of business. Incredible. And I wrote it up. I wrote it way down.
So why did that, yeah. Why such a dramatic
I'll tell you what, partially why it happened. Let's see, Transformers came out in like 83 or something like that, and it was gaining a lot of strength. And then soon after that, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out. And then also, I think there might have been another Star Wars movie, but I'm not sure. But anyhow, also in the 1987 line, there was a bunch of product put into the line that didn't really relate to other product, like eggs and stuff like that. do you know what I mean? There were these weird little guys that were eggs and that sort of thing. And they weren't the powerful figures, you know? And so the toy stores were swamped with product. And a lot of it they just couldn't sell. And so Masters just went dead pretty much at that time.
What did you think of the Filmation cartoon when that came out? Were you aware of that?
Let me say this. Did I tell you, I was managing the creation of product at Mattel for the Masters line, and the Filmation TV shows showed, and there was a guy by the name of Lou Scheimer who was the executive producer and one of the founders of Filmation. And when he saw this Masters product coming to him, he inadvertently paid me the highest compliment. He said, "What are these guys smoking?" So anyhow, hose nose and the rest of it.
Yeah. Before we go to the Q&A, I'd like to, if you could, you mentioned you had 15 years of product design experience. Could you talk a little about that?
I went to school in Chicago at the Institute of Design. And did I tell you that I won this contest there?
Yes, you did mention that yesterday,
okay.
yeah.
Anyhow, so I went to work for Dave Chapman in Chicago, one of the outstanding consultant design firms in the country at the time. And I designed, he had Hamilton Beach as a client. So I designed a Hamilton Beach deluxe blender and a mixer while I was there. And then I went to New York, worked in New York City for Walter Dorwin Teague Associates, and they had as one of their main clients Procter & Gamble. And so I designed the original Scope mouthwash bottle line, and in 1979, that line was voted by a panel of packaging design judges for Fortune magazine as one of the 35 top packages of the 20th century. And also, I designed the original Downy handle bottle line, which revolutionized the blow molding industry. And so those were two outstanding product concepts. And another thing about that Scope bottle, 2 years after it came out, it knocked off Listerine as the top-selling mouthwash in the world. And then I was working for Walter Dorwin Teague in their New York office, and they had about 150 designers there. And then I wanted to do something else besides packaging. So I transferred out to their Seattle office where they had Boeing as a client. And when I got out there, I could have worked either on the SST, supersonic jet, or I could have worked on the Boeing 747 jumbo jet. And so they put me on the 747. So for 2 years, I was in charge of 17 designers on the first interiors of the Boeing 747 jumbo jet. And one of the projects I had was to design an underfloor galley system that had kitchens where two kitchens where cargo space had been. And this system could feed 490 passengers 2 complete meals on one flight. And it had the underfloor kitchens and then elevators going up to the passenger cabins. And I had to design a series of service carts for them. And then they had five passenger cabin modules, and I designed all of those. And on that project, I was the one designer working with 91 engineers. And that was one incredible project. And then I worked on the flight deck of the 747 and designed an observer's console that went just to the left of the pilot's seat. And that was a really neat project too. And then after that, I left Mattel and went to work for Lockheed on the L-1011 jumbo jet. Oh. And I designed an underfloor galley system with them as well. But then I got laid off there, and I think Lockheed needed a $500 billion loan guarantee or something like that from the government to survive. And so they had a big layoff, and so I went to work for Mattel on temporary.
So you went back to Mattel?
No, that
was when you got
That was when I first started. April 18th, 1972, gotcha. I started working for Mattel, temporary. and so at first, I worked in preschool, designing preschool projects, and I did that for about 3 months, and then they were going to have to lay me off because Mattel was doing terribly. So they transferred me to the international department, and I worked there for 3 years. And then in 1975, I transferred into Derek Gable's preliminary design group in preliminary design. And I worked there until after I had created He-Man. But in 1982, the whole preliminary design group was separated out. And there was a reorganization. Right after I originated He-Man in very early 1981, Steve Nelson, who was vice president of visual design and packaging, went to Ray Wagner and he said, "This He-Man line is running late. Let us take it totally over, away from preliminary design and develop it completely." This had never been done before in the history of Mattel, where a product line had been originated in preliminary design and then given over to visual design. Every time before, all the product concepts were originated in preliminary design and then turned over to visual design to develop it. Mm-hmm. And so this was incredibly different. And there was a lot of animosity between visual design and preliminary design because Nelson wanted to take over both, and he eventually did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay, well, I think we're going to turn it over to Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, please come up to the microphone here and speak directly.
Yeah, you know, I can barely see you with that light there.
Yeah.
Hi, Mr. Sweet. Thanks for doing this and coming out. A lot of us saw the toys that made us. You were in that documentary.
I can barely hear you.
Oh, sorry. A lot of us saw the toys that made us, the documentary that you appeared in.
A lot of the what?
The toys that made us on Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Just wondered, do you give any credence to the theory that after She-Ra and the Princesses of Power came out, it was talked about in that documentary that a lot of boys thought they didn't have the power anymore, that that was part of the reason that Masters sort of fell in sales?
I have no idea. Mm-hmm. You know, let me say this also. In relation to the Filmation cartoon, I've watched 5 minutes of it. I never watched much of the thing at all. Yep. And after I left the original series of the Masters line, I haven't kept up with it, except I did see the 1989 relaunch of the new Adventures of He-Man. And that's the only thing I remember. I haven't kept up with it since then.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming out. Great to hear your stories.
Well, that's really nice. Thank you, sir. Yeah. And hey, thanks so much for being so nice. I mean, seriously, because there's been a lot of dissension through the years in relation to He-Man and Masters.
None of that here, for sure. Guys, come on down, ask some questions.
You know something? I think what I'm going to do is put my hand over that light and then I can see everybody.
So,
what's cooking? Good looking?
how's it going? So, Mr. Sweet, you told us about your favorite character you created, Schizo, of course, who was half good and half
You know, I
bad.
can barely hear these guys.
Oh, can we get the microphone up over there for the audience?
So,
You know, could I walk over there?
I can walk over to you.
Come here, yeah.
Or
what?
or come right here. Yeah.
So you told us about your favorite figure you made, the
Yeah.
character you created, Schizo, of course, and I really like that idea. Was there any other concepts that you created that you would like to share with us today? That maybe you have pictures you can show us
That
later
didn't
on?
make the line?
That didn't make the line, but that you
Right.
created.
Not really.
What about that? What about that slasher guy that had the pointy boots and the mustache, and he was bald, and he was called Slasher, I think. I think you have a picture.
I
of
didn't
him.
do that.
Really? I thought it was
No.
in your book. Okay.
Oh, wait, I don't think so.
The books you have there. What about Mandible Man, the insect?
Mandible Man, yeah, I remember
The insect
him.
man, yeah.
Yeah.
He was cool.
Hey, I did these drawings on 19-inch by 24-inch paper. I got incredibly fast at doing these drawings. The figures were 13 inches tall. And one day I did let's see, I did I did 9 of these drawings in 13 hours.
Wow.
That's a lot of drawing from nothing to a complete drawing.
Do we have more questions for Roger? Come on up here if you have a question. I'll just aim my microphone at you and you can ask. Anybody? Here we go.
Hi there, my name is Ken. Can you hear me? So I'm a dentist on my day job and a big He-Man fan. Thank you for your work on that. I just wanted to say thank you for your work on the Scope bottle, promoting oral health.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Let me tell you something. Those Downy bottles sold in the billions. Way more than He-Man Masters ever sold. I'm not kidding you. That you cannot believe the scope and the amount of product that was sold, like billions and billions of them throughout the world. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Do we have any other questions for Mr. Sweet? Now's your chance. All right. Let me know if you can't hear him and I'll have him come up to me.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I may not be able to hear you all the way, but go ahead, let's give it a try.
All right. How did you come up with the concept of Skeletor? And what did you think of the original He-Man movie, if you've seen it?
And what was the last part?
What did you think of the original He-Man movie or Master of the Universe movie that came out in the 80s?
1987 with Dolph Lundgren.
Yeah.
I thought he was an incredibly puny He-Man. I mean, he's an incredibly powerful guy for a human, but he's not a He-Man, you know.
No, I don't think I'd say that to his face.
But let me say this. Mark Taylor created Skeletor, and Mark Taylor created the Skull Castle look. I co-originated the Skull Castle prototype, which with minimal changes became Castle Grayskull. But Mark Taylor borrowed that skull motif directly from Frank Frazetta. Frank Frazetta had several drawings showing skulls, and he had this one called Conan the Adventurer that he did in 1966 that shows a huge skull in the background and this Conan the Adventurer in the foreground. But you know, practically everything's borrowed.
These are archetypes.
And I thought Skeletor was an all-time great bad guy, you know? And I thought Castle Grayskull was an all-time great playset motif. And Taylor was very largely responsible for those.
Okay, I actually have one more question.
Yeah.
There's going to be a new movie in a couple of years. What would your idea for a new He-Man movie be?
What would my idea be?
Yes.
I have no idea.
You can start thinking now. All right, thanks.
Hey, I'll be damn lucky to be here.
You'll be here.
But I plan to.
All right. Well, I think we will wrap it up there. If you'd like to meet Mr. Sweet in person and take a look at the wonderful books and illustrations
Let me just think here and see if there's something that we haven't mentioned that would really be worthwhile right now. Do we have a couple minutes?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, let me just think about that.
Okay.
Okay, let me just say this. When I originated He-Man, I knew we needed a Mattel, we needed a new male action line for Mattel bad. And so my main motivation was to help Mattel and the people in it. So that's that.
Great. All right.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. Mr. Sweet's table is number 501, and he has many of his illustrations and documents from Mattel days that you can take a look at, characters that were... Oh, do you have a question? There is one more,
Yeah.
2 more minutes. Go for it.
Derek.
Derek!
Hey,
oh my
how
God,
you doing?
I just came in a little bit late, so I...
This is Derek
okay.
Gable, everybody.
So, yeah.
Hey. Hey, you want to...
Derek Gable.
Can you come
Come
up here and sit?
come up here.
Come on up here and sit. How are you doing? Hey, Derek was a great
Thanks, Roger.
boss. Yeah,
Can I sit down here for a
sure,
second?
absolutely, yeah.
Yes. So,
Can we turn on his mic? We only have like a minute,
Well,
but
that's so nice, that's so nice.
I came
Yeah.
in late, so I didn't miss all the horrible things he probably said about me.
Well,
It's okay, I
I
forgive
can't
you.
remember what I said.
Thank God for that. Anyway, yeah, Roger worked for me at the time, and I have very clear memories of him putting He-Man on the end of the table. And it was he did it. We wanted to get the sculpting department to help, and remember they were too busy, so you did it yourself.
Yeah.
And it
Well,
was
let me say this. I may have said this before, but when I worked 3 weeks overtime, to come up with those figures, and the day before the product conference, I didn't have them assembled.
you did
And
it all
nobody
last
saw
minute.
them. And Diana Troop was in the next cubicle from mine. She had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so those figures were not assembled till the day of the product conference.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Does everybody know the story of why it all happened? Star Wars and all the things that we turned down Star Wars, and we were Tiger Woods. We were number one. Everybody else, the Mattel was up here, and everybody else playing for second. And I was in the meeting when we turned down Star Wars. There were 4 of us. And the president, the guy from Lucas, the president, and my senior vice president, myself, I was in charge of male action figures. And the 2 questions. Ray Wagner, who was the president, turned to the guy who, from Lucas, after we saw the clips and the Bible, and he said, "When's this movie coming out?" I think he said November. He turned to me and he said, "When can we have product?" And I said, "Well, if we pull all the stops out, maybe we can have product in March." So movies weren't a big deal in those days for licensing anyway, but he kind of said, "What's the point? This is for 5, 6-year-old boys. What's the point? If they want it for Christmas, they're going to be furious." So anyway, we turned it down. Well, the thing is, it went to Kenner. Star Wars went to Kenner. It just so happened that the guy who was running Kenner at the time was Bernie Loomis, who worked for Mattel. I don't know whether we fired him or he was just let go because of Hot Wheels. He took Hot Wheels from 7 to 100 and back to $7 million because he oversold it. So anyway, what happened then is that they had the same conversation. The guy in my position was a guy called David Carter, and they had the same conversation, but Bernie said to Dave, "I'll give you a couple of weeks to noodle on this," so which he did, and he came back with some great drawings. And they had the same dates, November and March, for the product, right? What's the point? And Bernie said, "Hey, we'll take a shot at it. We'll give them coupons." So anyway, that was the preamble. Then imagine then Star Wars is huge and Kenner's kicked out you-know-what. And the president of Mattel, who happened to be Ray Wagner at the time, came into my office and he looked at me and he said, "I want you to come up with something to compete with Star Wars." And I go, so why don't you make it like God and the universe? Let's not limit it, right?
What did you say?
God and the universe, right?
Oh,
right,
yeah, oh,
yeah,
yeah.
God,
There you go.
universe, right?
Wow.
So that is it. And for about 6 months, my group, I had a group of about 20 people. We generated giants and midgets and freaks and everything. And then until that one day, Roger came to me, and he was a weightlifter at the time. You'd never guess it today, but in the days, massive, massive.
Hey, I worked out 4 months and went from 160 pounds to 190 pounds.
Right.
And now I'm back to 155.
Wow, you're still buff. Anyway, so the whole talk was, hey, all these other male action figures are so darn wimpy. We got to do something that will make them look pathetic, and that was really the trigger that got it going. And Roger was that seed, and then of course there's so many other people. You've heard the expression as success. Well, it starts with a failure as an orphan. A success has 1,000 fathers. So,
Amen.
so for those of you that's seen the documentary that was done on it, there were a lot of fathers taking credit for the whole thing. And to be quite honest, there were many more aspects to it. For instance, it would have never happened today at Mattel for the simple reason that people in my position don't have a say. It wouldn't have happened today because remember when they did the test? Ray Wagner, after Roger showing, it was basically Vicodin, Vicor or whatever he was called, and the He-Man, and Ray Wagner looked at me and he says, I've got no idea.
What's this about Vicor?
That was the other guy that you showed. Remember?
Guys, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have another panel, but you can go to Roger's table. I hope you'll be with Roger at the table.